At first light on December 7th, 1944, the biting wind cut through the ruins of Bergstein, Germany. Snow had blanketed the Roer Valley during the night, turning the landscape into a deceptive sheet of white. Beneath that deceptive calm stood Hill 400, rising like a fortress above the valley, its summit bristling with German defenses, bunkers, pillboxes, interlocking fields of fire, and an observation tower that gave the enemy a commanding view of every Allied movement. 4 full American divisions had tried and failed to take that hill. The 9th Infantry Division had bled for 3 kilometers and 4,500 casualties. The 28th and 4th Divisions had lost over 12,000 men combined without gaining ground. The 5th Armored Division's tanks never even made it to the tree line, shredded by German 80s before they could engage. Now the impossible task of seizing Hill 400 fell to 2 battered companies of Rangers, Dog and Fox. Second Lieutenant Leonard Lamel, just 24, crouched behind a crumbling cemetery wall with what was left of Dog Company. He had seen the enemy before, Point du Hoc, Normandy, the cliffs, the gun emplacements, the carnage, but this would be different. There would be no surprise, no cliffs to scale, just 400 yards of frozen open ground and then a 45-degree ascent under fire. The Germans on the hill were veterans of the 980th Grenadier Regiment, dug in for weeks, bolstered by overlapping machine guns, pre-registered artillery coordinates, and an iron resolve not to give an inch. By the time Lamel had completed his 0300 reconnaissance crawl, the facts were inescapable. The enemy was ready. The Rangers were understrength. But the mission remained unchanged. Take the hill, hold the summit, and break the German eyes on the valley. At 0725, American artillery opened up. 18 batteries poured fire into the hill, walking explosions up the slope, shell after shell pounding trees, smashing pillboxes, cracking the icebound earth. The barrage was thunderous, unrelenting, and precise. Yet Lamel knew concrete and discipline survived shell fire. The barrage would shake the enemy, not destroy them. 3 minutes later, the artillery shifted to the summit. That was the signal. Without fanfare, without shouting, the Rangers rose from cover. 120 men moved like shadows across the snow. The plan was speed. Reach the tree line before the Germans could recover, before they could realign their weapons and rain down death. But the enemy was quicker than expected. At 150 yards, a lone MG-42 came to life. The bark of its fire tore through the morning haze. Tracers ripped across the field. Rangers fell. Mortars followed. The crossing that should have taken 2 minutes dragged to 4, then 5, as German fire intensified. Private William Anderson dropped to Lamel's left. Sergeant Ed Seor dove for a shallow rise. Lieutenant Ken McClure, hit in the leg, kept directing his men while kneeling in the snow. Captain Otto Mosny, Fox Company's towering commander, was hit in the shoulder but pressed on. The Rangers reached the tree line battered and breathless, having lost 14 men just getting across the field. The climb began. It was steep, treacherous, and cold. Tree trunks were used as ladders, frozen roots as handholds. German positions opened fire from above. Bark exploded. Rounds whined through the air. At 70 yards, Anderson reached a bunker and threw in 2 grenades. The blasts silenced the machine gun. On the left, Sergeant Rod Petty assaulted a pillbox with his bar. A steel door gave way under sustained fire. At 100 yards, they met wire, concertina, triple-stranded, placed to funnel attackers into kill zones. Lamel led the effort to cut through it under mortar fire and German grenades. One exploded just 5 feet from him, embedding wood and shrapnel into his jacket. He kept going. By 0748, Dog Company had pushed past the wire and were climbing the final stretch. Then the distant growl of diesel engines reached their ears. Armor was coming. At 0835, the Rangers reached the summit of Hill 400. They had scaled 400 feet of hell under fire and now stood atop the most vital terrain in the region. But the fight was far from over. The Germans had not abandoned the summit. The observation tower remained manned. Bunkers still spit fire. Anderson reached a main bunker and attempted to breach it with a grenade. It bounced back. He died in the explosion. Lamel took the position with a burst from his Thompson. Masny arrived with satchel charges. The steel door of the bunker was blasted open. Inside, 12 Germans, 8 dead, 4 wounded, marked the end of resistance at the top. By 0840, Hill 400 belonged to the Rangers. 28 prisoners were taken. Roughly 40 Germans lay dead, but 16 Rangers had also been killed, 23 wounded. That left 81 men holding 1,300 feet of frozen hilltop. They dug in where they could, using German fighting holes and damaged bunkers. The ground was too frozen for new foxholes. Lieutenant Howard Kettlehut arrived with a radio team to call in artillery support. The observation tower became his command post. At 0915, the German artillery began. Precision fire. 105mm rounds slammed into the summit, pre-sighted and deadly. Rangers huddled under logs, behind bodies, inside bunkers. The barrage lasted 10 minutes and claimed more lives. Then it stopped. Through the smoke, Lamel saw figures forming at the tree line. 150 German infantry from the 654th Grenadier Regiment moved uphill in 3 waves. Standard doctrine. 1 wave to draw fire, 1 to exploit, 1 to finish. The Rangers waited. They'd been trained to hold until the enemy was within 100 yards. At Kettlehut's command, artillery walked down the slope. Shells hit at 200 yards, then 150. The Germans pushed through it. Rangers opened fire. M1. Garans barked. Bars roared. MG-42s, captured and repurposed, screamed death. At 75 yards, the Germans tried to flank. Lamel shifted squads to block them. The line held. After 7 brutal minutes, the first counterattack collapsed. The Germans retreated, leaving their dead scattered across the slope. 4 more Rangers had died, 7 were wounded, and ammunition count was grim, 40 rounds per man. Bar gunners had 2 magazines, grenades were nearly gone. Major George Williams, the battalion XO, arrived with grim news. Reinforcements were hours away. The Rangers would have to hold until then. At 10:30, a new barrage slammed into Hill 400, 155mm shells and worse. A deadly prelude to the second counterattack. At 1100, 200 German troops advanced, backed by 3 assault guns, likely Sturmgeschütz III's. The armor halted at 300 yards and began direct fire. Rangers had only 2 bazookas. Sergeant James White, manning 1, fired at 150 yards. His round struck the glacis plate and bounced. The assault gun returned fire, leveling White's position. A second bazooka hit another tank from the side. Flames engulfed the vehicle. The rest withdrew. Infantry pushed on without armor. Waves of 50 moved methodically, flanking, advancing under cover, using discipline and coordination. At 100 yards, Rangers opened fire again. Grenades were thrown, rifles cracked, but the weight of German fire was crushing. At 50 yards, the 4th wave fixed bayonets. Rangers were out of grenades. Some were down to their last few rounds. Then, against all odds, Sergeant Ed Seor rose with 2 captured MP-40s, firing both from the hip. He advanced into the German line like a one-man charge. The sight galvanized the Rangers. They surged forward, pushing the Germans back with gunfire, bayonets, fists, and fury. By 11:30, the second counterattack was broken. 140 Germans lay dead. 12 more Rangers had fallen. Now only 43 Rangers remained able to fight. They faced 5 more hours of daylight, and word came that 600 Fallschirmjäger from the elite 6th Parachute Regiment were en route, veterans of Crete and Normandy. Lamel gave the facts to his men. He didn't lie. There were no reserves, no miracle, just 43 against 600. At 1500, the final German assault began. 6 waves. Paratroopers advanced with precision, leapfrogging in textbook fashion. Artillery thundered around them, but they kept coming. At 200 yards, fire was exchanged. At 150 yards, flanking attempts were made. Lamel and 5 Rangers intercepted a squad that had broken through on the left. Fighting was now point blank. Thompson bursts, entrenching tools, fixed bayonets. The 5th and 6th waves hit the lines at 15:45. German bayonets flashed, Ranger magazines emptied. Kettlehut called for danger-close artillery, shells landing within 50 yards of American positions. Steel and fire rained down. Both sides took casualties, but it stopped the charge. Germans lay at 30 yards, pinned. They didn't retreat, but they didn't advance. 2 hours passed in a bloody stalemate. At 17:30, American artillery surged. Then came the sounds of boots. A full company from the 8th Infantry Division had arrived. Fresh men, fresh ammo. They took positions alongside the Rangers. At 18:15, the Fallschirmjäger finally broke. They retreated into the darkness. The Battle of Hill 400 was over. The hilltop bore witness to 10 hours of the most ferocious combat the European theater had seen. 23 Rangers lay dead. 86 were wounded. 4 were missing. Of the 120 who began the assault that morning, only 11 remained combat effective. But they had done what divisions could not. German casualties were staggering. Over 400 dead, hundreds more wounded, 3 destroyed assault guns. The 6th Parachute Regiment, once elite, was shattered. Lieutenant Leonard Lamel was evacuated the next day with a concussion and shrapnel wounds. Before leaving, he walked the summit, saw the places where his comrades had fallen, saw what determination had accomplished. In the years that followed, when asked about Normandy or the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, Lamel always gave the same answer. June 6th was not his longest day. December 7th, 1944 was. The Rangers were relieved 2 days later. But rest never came. 9 days after Hill 400, the Germans launched the Battle of the Bulge. The Rangers, still battered, were sent to the front again. Hill 400 would fall briefly back into German hands, only to be retaken in February. By then, the war had shifted. The Germans were in retreat. But Hill 400 had already proven something far more important. That courage, training, and sheer willpower could hold a hill against overwhelming odds. That Americans, even when outgunned and outnumbered, would not yield. That the spirit of the Ranger Creed, Rangers lead the way, was more than a motto. It was a promise.